Can neutrality truly exist in a region that is on the edge of war, or is it just an illusion hiding deeper intentions? As tensions between Iran and Israel continue to escalate, the Arab Gulf states have made it their mission to reassure Iran of their neutrality. These states are trying not to lose Iran. But in the world of geopolitics, can nations remain neutral? When nations like the US aren't natural, how will Gulf nations stay so? Let's find out. In meetings in Doha, the Gulf nations have assured Iran of their neutrality. But why was this so important? The Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, and Bahrain, have long been aware of the devastating consequences of being drawn into external conflicts. The Middle East has historically been a geopolitical playground for global powers seeking control over resources, influence, and strategic footholds. From colonial interventions to Cold War-era proxy wars, the region has borne witness to foreign manipulation, often leaving the local populations to pick up the pieces. These experiences have profoundly shaped the Gulf nations' current desire for neutrality. Today, neutrality is not just a diplomatic choice for these nations, it's a survival mechanism deeply rooted in the lessons of history. One of the primary reasons behind their decision to remain neutral is to prevent their lands from being turned into battlegrounds for foreign wars. The scars left by previous conflicts, especially the Gulf Wars, are still fresh. During these conflicts, nations like Iraq and Kuwait found their territories engulfed by violence, with foreign military bases springing up like unwanted guests. The memories of Kuwait's devastation during the 1990 Gulf War serve as a stark reminder to Gulf leaders of the costs of being involved in large-scale conflicts. Gulf leaders have learned that allowing foreign powers to use their lands for military operations against regional neighbors can have devastating long-term consequences. This time, they are drawing a line in the sand. No foreign troops will launch attacks against Iran from Gulf soil. This assurance to Iran is not merely symbolic. Gulf nations have taken concrete steps to communicate this stance. Diplomatic channels have been utilized extensively to assure Tehran that the Gulf states are not interested in facilitating attacks against their country. While these countries host U.S. military bases, including the strategic Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar and the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, Gulf leaders have made it clear that these bases are not to be used as staging grounds for offensive actions against Iran. On one hand, these nations must maintain their security relationships with the West, particularly the U.S., which provides crucial defense support. On the other hand, they must reassure Iran that they are not complicit in any aggression against Tehran. From Iran's perspective, these assurances matter greatly. Tehran has a long history of perceiving foreign military bases as potential threats, particularly when those bases are located near its borders. The presence of U.S. forces in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Gulf has long been a point of contention for Iranian leaders. Iran knows that foreign military bases in neighboring countries often serve as jumping-off points for regional operations. For this reason, Gulf neutrality offers Tehran a measure of reassurance, at least for now, that it will not be encircled by hostile forces ready to strike. The second reason for Gulf neutrality lies in the region's recognition of the broader consequences of the Iran-Israel conflict. Gulf leaders understand that the stakes extend far beyond the immediate parties involved. They recognize the gravity of the situation, how easily this regional conflict could spiral into a global catastrophe. The Middle East has long been a tinderbox, with every small conflict carrying the risk of igniting a much larger fire. The involvement of global powers, whether through arms sales, military alliances, or political influence, often turns these localized conflicts into international crises. Gulf nations are keenly aware that aligning too closely with one side could push the conflict beyond regional borders, potentially triggering a new world war. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. In the Gulf's view, allowing the conflict to escalate on their soil would be disastrous, not only for the region but for the entire world. The idea that a regional conflict could ignite a global one is not far-fetched. After all, history has shown that small wars can expand into much larger confrontations when global powers are involved. Gulf leaders are not naive. They see the potential for a wider conflict involving the United States, Russia, China, and other global actors who have vested interests in the Middle East. By maintaining neutrality, the Gulf nations hope to prevent this conflict from drawing in additional international powers and spiraling out of control. This approach to neutrality also serves a greater purpose: regional unity. The Gulf Cooperation Council (GCC) nations have made significant efforts in recent years to foster unity among Arab states. They recognize that division within the Arab world only weakens their collective bargaining power on the global stage. The Iran-Israel conflict presents a real danger of further fracturing Arab unity. By maintaining neutrality, the Gulf states seek to ensure that this conflict does not become a wedge driving apart Arab nations, which could weaken the region and make it more vulnerable to external manipulation. Finally, the Gulf states' neutrality is driven by one of their most pressing concerns: economic stability. Their economies are deeply intertwined with global oil markets, and their wealth is largely tied to their ability to export oil. In an environment where oil continues to dominate global energy needs, any disruption to Gulf oil production could spell disaster for their economies. Gulf nations have spent decades building up their oil industries, which have become their primary source of income and a crucial part of their national identities. The prospect of oil fields becoming battlegrounds in the Iran-Israel conflict is a nightmare scenario for Gulf leaders. They are acutely aware of the risks involved in getting caught in the crossfire between Iran and Israel, both of which have the military capability to target oil facilities if the conflict escalates. The 2019 attack on Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq oil processing facility, allegedly carried out by Iran or its proxies, serves as a chilling reminder of how vulnerable the Gulf's oil infrastructure is. That attack temporarily disrupted 5% of the global oil supply, sending shockwaves through energy markets and highlighting the Gulf's exposure to regional conflicts. Given these risks, Gulf states have every reason to stay neutral. By doing so, they hope to protect their economic interests and ensure that their oil fields remain untouched. They understand that any involvement in the conflict could result in retaliatory strikes on their oil infrastructure, which would not only cripple their economies but also trigger a global energy crisis. Neutrality, in their view, is the best way to prevent their oil facilities from becoming collateral damage in a larger war. But how do the Gulf states hope to prevent this conflict from growing into a global war? The Gulf states understand that this conflict between Iran and Israel is not just another regional skirmish. It has the potential to ignite a far more destructive global conflict. These nations are determined not to be the spark that sets off such a catastrophe. One of the core principles of their foreign policy is to prevent escalation by ensuring that they remain impartial and not drawn into the fray. At the heart of this strategy is diplomacy. The Gulf nations have consistently positioned themselves as mediators in regional disputes, often hosting peace talks and acting as intermediaries between conflicting parties. Qatar, for example, has taken on the role of mediator in various disputes over the years, from Lebanon's political crisis to negotiations between the Taliban and the US. This track record of diplomacy is key to their strategy of avoiding escalation. By keeping the lines of communication open with all sides, the Gulf states hope to de-escalate tensions and prevent the conflict from spreading beyond the region. Now, what is at stake if these nations don't stay neutral? For the Gulf states, the decision to remain neutral is not just about preventing war, it's about protecting their economic future. Oil is the lifeblood of these nations, and any disruption to their oil production could have devastating consequences for their economies. This economic imperative is one of the primary reasons why the Gulf states are so invested in maintaining neutrality in the Iran-Israel conflict. The Gulf states are keenly aware of these vulnerabilities. Their neutrality is a way of ensuring that they are not dragged into the conflict and that their oil infrastructure remains protected. However, neutrality is not a guarantee of safety. Even if they remain neutral, there is always the risk that their oil facilities could become targets in the event of an escalation. Iran, for example, has already hinted that it could target the oil infrastructure of nations that it perceives as supporting Israel or the West. In addition to the direct threats posed by the conflict, the Gulf states also face long-term challenges related to their reliance on oil. The global shift towards renewable energy is putting pressure on oil-producing nations to diversify their economies. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 plan, for example, aims to reduce the kingdom's dependence on oil by investing in sectors such as tourism, entertainment, and technology. However, this transition will take time, and in the meantime, the Gulf states remain heavily dependent on oil revenues. If their neutrality fails and their oil infrastructure is targeted, the economic consequences could be severe, not just for the Gulf states, but for the global economy as a whole. Do you think neutrality is the best option? Will not taking sides lead to an end to this conflict? Why the West don't do the same? Let us know in the comments section. Are Gulf nations playing smart? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
Tell us what you think in the comment section. Like and share the video, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our African videos. It's the best way to support us.